the fading light of Los Angeles, as the warm gold of the afternoon sank into the pale violet of evening, the Forrester mansion stood unnervingly still. The grand staircase, the echo of laughter that once filled its marble hallways, and the faint trace of perfume lingering in the air, all of it seemed to wait, suspended, as if the house itself sensed that something final was approaching. Eric sat alone in the study, the soft hum of the city outside barely touching the room's heavy silence. The air was thick with the faint scent of old wood, whiskey, and the breathless weight of memory. His chest rose with effort. The illness that he once believed he had conquered had returned, more vicious than before. His lungs betrayed him again, filling him with a burning that felt less like pain and more like a quiet surrender. But this time, Eric was not afraid. He had made peace with his fate in a way only a man who had loved too deeply and lost too often could. Donna's laughter, light, bright, unrestrained, had once brought him back from the edge of despair. And now, as his body weakened, it was her presence that held him upright when the nights turned long and his breath came short. He had told her everything in a voice fragile but firm, that she had been the light that pierced through his decline, that she had given him not just comfort but purpose. In her, he saw not just the woman who loved him, but the reflection of the life he had built, flawed, extravagant, passionate, and profoundly human. And so he made his final decision. Every piece of his empire, every thread of Forrester creations that still bore his name, would belong to her. It wasn't about fairness or family politics. It was love, raw and unapologetic. The news would crush the others, Ridge, Brooke, Steffi, even the loyal designers who had built their careers in his shadow. They all believed that Forrester creations belonged to the family, to legacy, to the idea of a dynasty. But Eric knew better. Legacies die when hearts grow cold, and he had spent his final months watching those he loved most fall into the same battles he once fought. Control. Pride. Jealousy. The cycle never ended. Donna had never fought him. She had never tried to control him. She had simply been there, quietly, tenderly, holding him when the coughing fits left him gasping for air, whispering hope into nights that otherwise would have ended in silence. That was what he wanted to honor. Love, in its purest, least performative form. When the diagnosis came lung failure, recurrence of his old condition, the doctors had offered options: another surgery, more oxygen support, a clinical trial. But Eric refused. He was tired of fighting what could not be beaten. He wanted control over his ending, not an endless prolonging of pain. The decision left Ridge furious, unable to understand how his father could give up. But for Eric, it wasn't surrender, it was grace. He wanted his final act to be one of clarity, not desperation. He began setting his affairs in order, dictating letters, rewriting his will, asking Carter to oversee the legal documents without informing the family. There was a solemnity to it, an artist preparing his final sketch, each stroke measured and deliberate. Donna had cried when he told her. She begged him to reconsider, to at least tell Ridge, to make peace with the rest of the family before it was too late. But Eric's eyes, those same eyes that once commanded boardrooms and ateliers alike, held steady. "They'll understand someday," he had whispered. And deep down, Donna knew they would not. They would see greed, betrayal, confusion. But not love. They never truly saw him the way she did, not as a patriarch or a business titan, but as a man who had loved, failed, rebuilt, and still found space in his heart to forgive. As the week went on, Eric's health declined. The coughing returned, deeper, more violent, until every breath seemed to claw its way through his chest. The staff moved quietly, the Forrester home becoming a sanctuary of murmurs and half-closed doors. Donna rarely left his side. She brought him tea he never finished, read him stories he could no longer follow, and held his hand until he drifted in and out of uneasy sleep. Sometimes, in the early dawn hours, he would awaken disoriented, whispering names: Stephanie, Ridge, Brooke, Felicia, as if calling them back from the ghosts of their shared past. Donna would listen without jealousy, because she understood that love never fully leaves. It only changes its shape. When word began to spread that Eric's condition had worsened, the family gathered. Ridge arrived first, trying to disguise fear beneath authority. Brooke came next, her beauty dimmed by the gravity of what she knew was inevitable. Steffi, Thomas, and even Hope filled the room one by one, each carrying memories of a man whose approval had defined their lives. Yet it was Donna who stayed closest, a quiet guardian of his final peace. The tension was suffocating. Each member of the Forrester clan wrestled with emotions they could not articulate: grief, guilt, resentment. They watched as the patriarch who had built their world faded before their eyes, his breaths growing slower, his gaze distant. Then came the moment that would shatter them. Eric asked for Donna's hand and whispered something that none of them could hear. The nurse turned off the oxygen machine. Silence followed, a silence so deep it felt like the house itself was mourning. And then, with a faint smile, Eric took one last breath, his fingers curling gently around Donna's before going still. The world seemed to stop. Donna broke first, her cries echoing through the room, not the sharp wails of sudden grief, but the hollow, aching sound of a woman who had already begun grieving long before the final moment came. Ridge turned away, his shoulders trembling. Brooke's eyes filled with tears she could no longer hold back. There was no speech, no ceremony, just the unbearable truth that Eric Forrester was gone. But grief in the Forrester family has never been simple. Hours after the doctor declared him gone, Carter arrived with an envelope bearing Eric's seal. It was the updated will. When he read the clause aloud, the room erupted into chaos. Every share, every property, every intellectual right to the Forrester name transferred entirely to Donna Logan. Ridge was speechless. Brooke's mouth opened, but no words came. Steffi's eyes narrowed, already calculating the fallout. For a moment, Donna herself could not speak. Her hands trembled as she shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No," she whispered. "He didn't do this for the money." But it was too late.
The ink was dry.
The choice had been made. The next days were brutal. Rumors spread across Los Angeles faster than truth could catch up. Magazines speculated about greed, betrayal, and manipulation. Headlines painted Donna as a schemer who had seduced an old man in his final days for control of his empire. The cruelty was relentless. Yet through it all, she refused to defend herself publicly. She knew that no amount of justification could make the world see what she saw in Eric's eyes. Ridge confronted her in fury, accusing her of taking advantage of a dying man's vulnerability, of isolating him from his family. But behind that anger was something deeper: hurt, confusion, the unbearable sting of being left behind. He had always been his father's heir in spirit. To be cut out was a betrayal that words could not ease. Donna spent those nights alone in the mansion, unable to sleep. The shadows on the walls seemed to shift with every flicker of candlelight, echoing the shape of Eric's presence. She would wander the halls in his old robe, touching the frames of family portraits, whispering apologies to the silence. Guilt gnawed at her. She had never asked for this. She would have given up every cent to have one more day with him. But love is not rational, and neither are the choices we make at the edge of mortality. She began writing letters, to Ridge, to Brooke, to everyone who felt betrayed, trying to explain what Eric had felt in his final days. But she never sent them. Words seemed too fragile to carry something so immense. Meanwhile, Forrester Creations entered a storm. Without Eric's steady hand, the company fractured into factions. Ridge tried to assert control, claiming moral authority over the brand his father built. Brooke backed him, torn between loyalty to Ridge and compassion for Donna. Steffi and Thomas whispered in private about legal challenges, about contesting the will, about saving the company from scandal. And yet, through the chaos, Donna remained calm. She refused to fight. "It's still his house," she told Carter quietly. "His dream. His legacy. I'm just keeping it warm until the family remembers what love was supposed to mean." That quiet dignity began to shift the air around her. Reporters who came expecting drama found grace. Employees who feared layoffs found compassion. Slowly, the Forrester home began to fill again with laughter, soft, hesitant, but real. Donna had no interest in power. She focused instead on restoring what Eric loved most, the artistry of creation. She reopened his old office, left his sketches on the wall, and ordered the staff not to touch a thing. Each day, she would sit in his chair for a few minutes, tracing the grooves on the desk where his hands once rested, as if listening for his voice in the quiet hum of the air. Yet beneath that calm, grief still lingered like smoke. Every night, when the house finally slept, Donna would stand on the balcony overlooking the garden where Eric had planted white roses for Stephanie decades ago. Their fragrance, heavy and pure, filled the air. She would close her eyes and remember the last words he had said to her, the words she never repeated to anyone, that she had taught him what peace felt like. That for the first time in his life, he was not afraid of dying. Those words became her anchor, her truth amid the storm of accusation and doubt. In time, the family began to soften. Ridge, haunted by guilt, revisited his father's journals and found notes written in Eric's shaky hand. Ridge will always have my pride, but Donna holds my peace. That line broke something inside him. He went to see her one evening, not as a rival, but as a son seeking closure. When he entered the study, he found her sitting by the fireplace, reading one of Eric's old sketchbooks. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was sacred. The news of Eric's death swept through LA, shaking the city's elite fashion world. Tributes flooded in from designers, models, and competitors alike. The man who had defined a generation of glamour had gone, leaving behind an empire and a void no one could fill. Yet amid the grief, there was admiration for the way he had chosen his ending with dignity, for the courage to love until the very last breath. John McCook's portrayal of Eric had been more than just a role. It had been a journey, one that mirrored the fragility and strength of the human heart itself. And so, in the quiet days that followed, Los Angeles moved on, but the Forrester mansion did not. Its windows glowed softly each night, a silent beacon of memory. Inside, Donna still kept fresh flowers in Eric's study, still spoke to him in whispers, still thanked him for every sunset she could see without breaking. Because in her heart, he had never truly left. He had only changed form, from presence to echo, from man to memory, from love to legacy. And that was something death could never take away. The mornings after Eric's death were unbearably quiet. The mansion that once hummed with elegance now felt like a mausoleum. Donna moved through it like a ghost, her bare feet brushing against the cold marble floors, her fingers tracing the edges of picture frames as though touching his image could bring him back. Every sound, a door creaking, a clock ticking, felt too loud. Every silence too long. She could still hear his coughs echoing in her mind, the faint rasp of his voice when he whispered her name. Sleep never came easily. When she closed her eyes, she saw the moment he slipped away, his smile soft, his hand heavy in hers, and she would wake with her throat raw from holding back the sobs that refused to stop. Grief became her only constant companion. She tried to keep the house alive the way he would have wanted. Fresh flowers in the foyer, the curtains open to the morning light, a gentle record playing on the old gramophone in his study. But none of it brought peace. There were days when she could barely breathe, when guilt pressed against her chest with the same suffocating weight that his illness had pressed against his. She kept asking herself the same question over and over. Why her? Why had he trusted her with everything he had built, when he knew how much the world, and his own family, would despise her for it? The answer, she thought, was love. But love, in the Forrester world, had never been enough to silence ambition. The storm came quickly. Ridge was the first to unleash it. He arrived at the mansion unannounced one afternoon, his face hardened with anger, eyes burning with betrayal. To him, it wasn't just about inheritance, it was about legacy. For decades, Forrester Creations had been the crown jewel of his father's name, and now that jewel sat in the hands of a woman who, in his mind, did not belong to their bloodline. He accused her of manipulation, of using her beauty and charm to twist a dying man's heart. He said she had poisoned Eric's judgment, that she had stolen what rightfully belonged to the Forrester family. Donna listened in silence, her tears falling quietly as he spoke.
She didn't fight back.
She didn't scream or defend herself, because deep down, she knew that nothing she could say would reach him. Not now, not while grief and pride burned so fiercely inside him. But his words still cut her. "A Logan," he spat, his voice trembling. He left Forrester Creations to a Logan. After everything we built. After everything we sacrificed. Steffi's anger was quieter but colder, the kind that froze the air in a room. She confronted Donna days later at the office, standing tall in her sleek black suit, every inch the image of power and control. To Steffi, this was not just betrayal, it was humiliation. She had spent years proving herself in a world that doubted her, fighting to be seen not as Eric's granddaughter, but as a leader in her own right. Now all that hard work felt stolen. The sight of Donna sitting in Eric's chair, holding his pen, signing documents under his name, it was unbearable. "You don't belong here," Steffi said, her voice low, almost trembling. "This company was built on family. Real family. You can't buy your way into that." Donna wanted to tell her that she had never wanted this power. That Eric had chosen her not to replace the Forresters, but to remind them of something they had forgotten. Compassion. But every attempt to explain was met with cold eyes and accusations. Soon, the rest of the family joined in. Thomas, pragmatic but loyal, suggested contesting the will. Brooke tried to play mediator, torn between her sister and her ex-husband's family, but even her presence only fueled the tension. The mansion became a battleground, every conversation a war between love and legacy. And through it all, Donna's grief deepened into isolation. The public saw her as the woman who inherited everything, a golden widow draped in pearls and secrets. But behind the closed doors of that grand estate, she was breaking. Nights were the worst. She would sit in Eric's study, the fireplace flickering low, and whisper to the empty chair across from her. "I'm trying," she would say. "But they hate me. They think I took you from them." Sometimes, she imagined his reply, gentle, forgiving, full of that quiet warmth that had always steadied her. But imagination could not fill the ache of absence. The board of Forrester Creations demanded a meeting. Ridge arrived flanked by Steffi and Carter, determined to reclaim what he saw as his birthright. Donna came alone. The conference room buzzed with whispers as she entered, the weight of every gaze falling on her like judgment. When she opened the folder Eric had left her, the room went still. Inside were not just legal documents, but letters, handwritten in Eric's familiar script, addressed to each of them. To Steffi, he wrote of her strength, urging her to remember that leadership was not control, it was compassion. And to Donna, he wrote only one line, "You saw me as a man, not a monument. That's why I trust you." Tears filled the room, but they did not heal it. Ridge folded his letter with trembling hands, his expression unreadable. "He wasn't in his right mind," he muttered. "You manipulated him when he was weak." His voice cracked, betraying the emotion beneath the anger. For the first time, Donna spoke, not as a victim, but as the woman who had loved Eric more purely than anyone else. She told them about his final days, his wishes, his pain. She told them how he begged her to promise that love, not greed, would guide the family after he was gone. Her voice shook, but she held steady until the end. "He didn't choose me over you," she said softly. "He chose peace over pride." But pride dies hard in a Forrester heart. The following weeks turned vicious. Ridge filed motions to review the will, Steffi rallied the board to remove Donna as acting chairwoman, and the media feasted on every headline. Logan heiress inherits Forrester empire. Scandal erupts over Eric Forrester's final decision. Paparazzi camped outside the gates, their cameras flashing like lightning each time Donna appeared. She retreated into the mansion, her world shrinking to the same few rooms where she and Eric had once laughed, once dreamed, once believed in forever. Yet grief has a way of transforming pain into resilience. One morning, as sunlight spilled through the French windows, Donna found herself standing before the mirror in Eric's old dressing room. She looked older than she remembered, eyes swollen, hair unkempt, but beneath the exhaustion, she saw something new: quiet strength. She realized that Eric had not chosen her because she was perfect, but because she had heart. And heart was what Forrester Creations had lost amid its endless wars. She returned to the office the next day, walking past the whispers, past the stairs, and entered the design floor where Eric once sketched. The staff froze, unsure how to react. Donna simply smiled and said, "Let's create something beautiful today." That moment, small but profound, began to shift everything. Slowly, the designers, the seamstresses, the assistants, those who had once adored Eric, began to rally around her. They saw not a gold digger, but a woman determined to honor a man's legacy with grace instead of greed. Meanwhile, Ridge's fury began to falter under the weight of his own memories. He found himself haunted by visions of his father's last words, by the faint smile Eric wore even in pain. Steffi, too, began to question the war she was fighting. Late one night, she returned to the office alone, walking through the silent halls that still carried her grandfather's scent of cologne and paint. She found one of Eric's old sketches on the wall, an unfinished dress design labeled peace. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized what the word truly meant. But redemption never comes easily in this family. Even as doubt softened them, the world outside was merciless. Shareholders panicked, the press speculated about a corporate collapse, and whispers of a buyout began circling. Donna faced the impossible. To prove she could lead, she had to protect the company from being devoured by competitors while simultaneously convincing Eric's children that she wasn't their enemy. Each decision she made was scrutinized, every move twisted by gossip. One night, as a storm rolled over Los Angeles, she stood by the window of Eric's study, lightning flashing across the sky. She could almost hear his voice again, soft, steady, full of that gentle humor that always made her heart calm. "Don't let them tear each other apart," he had told her. "They'll understand someday." The tears came freely this time, but they weren't just grief. They were determination. She realized that this was her purpose now, to heal what he left behind. And so she began rebuilding, not just the company but the family. She invited Ridge and Steffi to a private dinner at the mansion, setting Eric's chair at the head of the table. They refused at first, but eventually curiosity overcame anger. The meal was awkward, tense, full of unspoken words. But when Donna stood and placed Eric's final sketch on the table, a wedding gown he never finished, silence fell. "He wanted this to be his last collection," she said quietly. "Not for money. Not for fame. For love. He wanted all of you to finish it together." The gesture cracked something open. Ridge's eyes softened. Steffi's shoulders fell. For the first time since the funeral, they looked at Donna not as an outsider, but as someone who loved Eric as deeply as they did. The three of them worked late into the night, finishing the sketch, bringing it to life piece by piece. When it was done, the gown shimmered under the chandelier, a symbol of unity, fragile but real. The following month, Forrester Creations unveiled the Legacy Collection, dedicated to Eric's memory. The show was unlike any before it, simple, elegant, raw. Donna sat in the front row, clutching the small gold cufflink Eric had left her. When the final model stepped onto the runway wearing the completed gown, the audience rose in silent awe. Ridge looked toward Donna across the runway, and in his eyes there was no hatred, only understanding. In that moment, the weight of anger lifted from the Forrester name. The feud did not vanish overnight, wounds that deep never heal easily. But there was peace in the air, a sense that Eric's spirit had finally found rest. Donna knew she would always be blamed by some, doubted by many. But she no longer needed their approval. She had fulfilled the promise she made to him, to protect what mattered most. When the lights dimmed after the show, she returned alone to the mansion. The roses in the garden glistened with rain, their fragrance heavy in the night air. She stood beneath the archway where Eric once told her he loved her and whispered, "We did it." The wind moved softly through the leaves, and for a moment, she swore she could feel his hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. The world would remember Eric Forrester for his genius, his legacy, his power. But Donna would remember him differently, as the man who taught her that love, even in its final breath, could outlive death itself. And as long as she drew breath, she would keep his dream alive. Not through ownership or wealth, but through